my family sold me into marriage for $50K, then demanded more when I tried to escape. My uncle counted the cash twice before shaking hands with my future husband. $50,000. That's what my family decided I was worth. What they didn't tell me until after the wedding was that this wasn't a one-time payment. It was an installment plan, and I was the collateral. Let me take you back to the beginning, because this story doesn't start with betrayal. It starts with love, or what I thought was love. I was 22, fresh out of college with a degree in computer science that my parents had reluctantly allowed me to pursue. Education is good, my mother would say, but marriage is better. Education ends, but family is forever. In our tight-knit religious community in Houston, I was already considered past my prime. Most of my cousins had been married off by 18, some even younger. But I had dreams beyond marriage, dreams of working in tech, of building something meaningful, of choosing my own path. My parents, Maria and Roberto, had emigrated from El Salvador when I was 5. They worked tirelessly to build a life here. My father working construction 12 hours a day, my mother cleaning houses at night. Everything we did was for our family's honor and standing in the community. Esperanza, my mother would say as she braided my hair each morning, you are our precious daughter. Everything we do is to protect you, to secure your future. I believed her completely. Why wouldn't I? These were the people who had sacrificed everything for me. When they first mentioned Carlos, I was actually excited. Finally, I thought, they're taking my feelings into consideration. He was educated, they said, successful, from a good family. He had specifically requested someone with a degree, someone modern but still respectful of tradition. He saw your photo at your cousin Isabella's wedding, my Aunt Rosa explained over coffee. He was very impressed, said you looked like someone who could balance both worlds, traditional values, American education. I felt chosen, special. For the first time, being educated seemed like an asset rather than a liability in the marriage market. The courtship was everything I had dreamed of. Carlos would visit our home every Sunday, bringing flowers for my mother and engaging my father in discussions about business and current events. He was charming, well-dressed, spoke perfect English alongside fluent Spanish. He asked about my studies, my career aspirations, even suggested I could continue working after marriage. He wants a partner, he told me during one of our chaperoned conversations. Not just a wife who stays home. I admire your ambition. My parents beamed with pride. Here was a man who appreciated their daughter's achievements, who could provide for her while still respecting her independence. The church elders nodded approvingly when they saw us together at Sunday services. During this time, I noticed more visitors coming to our house, men in expensive suits, speaking in hushed tones with my father and uncle. Money changed hands, though I assumed it was related to my father's side business importing goods from Central America. Our standard of living improved noticeably. My mother got new jewelry, my father bought a newer truck, and they started talking about expanding their small market. Business is good, my father would say when I asked about the changes. God is blessing our family. The wedding preparations were elaborate, more elaborate than we could normally afford. The church hall was booked for 3 days, the most expensive caterer hired, hundreds of guests invited. I should have wondered where the money was coming from, but I was too caught up in the excitement of my fairy tale romance. The night before the wedding, my mother sat beside me as female relatives helped me prepare. Tomorrow you become a wife, she said, tears in her eyes. Remember, mija, marriage is about sacrifice. Sometimes we must endure hardship for the greater good of the family. Promise me you'll remember that. I thought she was giving me typical wedding advice about compromise and patience. I had no idea she was preparing me for survival. The wedding day was beautiful. I felt like a princess in my white dress, surrounded by the love and blessings of our entire community. When Carlos and I exchanged vows, when he placed the ring on my finger, I felt complete. This was the beginning of my real life. The first sign something was wrong came during the reception. I overheard my Uncle Miguel talking to one of Carlos's relatives. The first installment is complete, but remember, there are conditions. If she tries to leave or causes problems, the agreement is void, and you keep everything paid so far. I assumed they were discussing some business deal. It never occurred to me they were discussing me. The second sign came on our wedding night. After all the guests had left and we were finally alone in what was supposed to be our new home, Carlos's demeanor changed completely. The charm evaporated like morning mist. "Let's get something straight," he said, loosening his tie with mechanical precision. "This marriage isn't about love or partnership. It's a business arrangement. Your family owes mine a debt, and you're the payment plan." I laughed, thinking he was making some kind of crude joke. "What are you talking about?" He showed me a contract, pages of legal documents in both English and Spanish. My father's signature was on every page, along with my uncle's. The amounts were staggering. $50,000 already paid, with another $100,000 to be paid in installments over the next 5 years. "Your family needed money to avoid bankruptcy," Carlos explained with cold efficiency. "My family needed a wife for me who could handle American society and eventually bring over more girls from my cousins. It's a win-win arrangement, as long as you play your part." Play my part? I could barely form the words.
Obedient wife. No complaints to your family, no complaints to the community. You work, you contribute your salary to the household, and you help us identify other suitable girls from your social circle. In return, your family avoids financial ruin and social disgrace. I felt the world tilting beneath my feet. And if I refuse? His smile was colder than a Texas winter. Then, your family loses everything they've already received, plus penalties. Your father's business, your parents' house, your younger brother's college tuition. All of it disappears. Plus, the community learns that your family are welchers who don't honor their agreements. You know what that means for your brother's marriage prospects, your cousins' reputations. That first night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window of what was supposed to be our bedroom, still in my wedding dress, trying to process the magnitude of the betrayal. My parents, the people who claimed to love me more than life itself, had sold me. Not just my hand in marriage, but my entire future, my autonomy, my dreams. The next morning, I called my mother, desperate for an explanation, for her to tell me this was all some terrible misunderstanding. "Mama, I need to come home. I need to talk to you about..." "Esperanza," her voice was strained, different. "You cannot come home. You are married now. Your place is with your husband." "But Mama, you don't understand. He's telling me things that don't make sense about contracts and money and..." "Listen to me carefully," my mother interrupted, and I could hear my father's voice in the background coaching her. "We did what we had to do to save this family. Carlos is your husband now. You must make this work. There is no coming back." The line went dead. I called my best friend Jessica, thinking at least I could confide in someone. But she seemed different too. Evasive. Uncomfortable. "I can't really talk right now, but Esperanza, maybe you should just try to make the best of things. Marriage is hard for everyone at first." Later, I would discover that Carlos had already reached out to my social circle, presenting himself as a concerned husband, worried about his wife's adjustment issues, and asking them to encourage me to settle down and accept my new responsibilities. Within a week, my isolation was complete. My family wouldn't see me. My friends thought I was having normal newlywed problems. The community saw a successful marriage between two educated, compatible people. And Carlos? Carlos began to show me exactly what kind of man I had been sold to. The psychological pressure started immediately. He would scrutinize every aspect of my behavior, my appearance, my interactions with others. I wasn't allowed to speak to male colleagues beyond what was absolutely necessary for work. I had to account for every minute of my day. My paychecks were deposited into an account he controlled. "This is temporary," he would say when I protested. just until you learn to manage money properly, until you prove you can be trusted. But the worst part wasn't the control. It was the gradual revelation of what I was truly part of. Other young women began appearing at community functions, always with similar stories. Recent marriages to men from Carlos's extended network, wives who looked increasingly hollow-eyed and subdued as months passed. I started paying attention, started connecting dots. The expensive cars, the sudden wealth of certain families, the way certain fathers began treating their daughters like commodities rather than children. This wasn't just about me. This was a system. 6 months into my marriage, I met Carmen at a community dinner. She was 19, married to Carlos's cousin, Diego, and she was clearly pregnant. But what struck me wasn't her condition. It was the fear in her eyes, the way she flinched when her husband touched her shoulder, the bruises on her wrists that she tried to hide with bracelets. During a brief moment when we were alone in the women's restroom, she grabbed my arm. "Sister," she whispered urgently, "you understand, right? You see what's happening." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "My family, they told me if I complain, if I cause problems, my little sister will be next. She's only 16. Tears streamed down her face. I can't protect myself, but maybe I can protect her." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while Carlos slept beside me, and I realized something that changed everything. I wasn't just a victim. By staying silent, by playing along, I was becoming complicit in a system that was destroying other women too. The next day, I started documenting everything, every conversation, every financial transaction I could access, every pattern I observed. I began taking photos of documents Carlos left lying around, recording conversations on my phone when possible. What I discovered was worse than I had imagined. This wasn't just about arranged marriages. It was about trafficking women into situations of domestic servitude and emotional bondage, using family debt and community pressure as chains. The network was sophisticated. Families in financial distress were approached with business opportunities, usually import-export ventures that required collateral. When they inevitably couldn't repay, their daughters became the payment plan. The girls were married off to men who would control their labor, their reproduction, and their social connections to bring in more victims. It was a revolving door of exploitation, hidden behind the veneer of traditional marriage customs. But the most heartbreaking discovery was in Carlos's home office. A list of names, girls aged 14 to 22, with notations about their education levels, family financial situations, and marketability. My brother's girlfriend Anna was on that list. So was my cousin Sophia, barely 17 and still in high school. That's when I knew I couldn't just escape. I had to bring the whole system down. My escape plan took months to develop. I couldn't just run. That would only trigger the penalties against my family and put other girls at immediate risk. I needed to be strategic. First, I reached out to Jessica again, this time with a different approach. Instead of asking for help directly, I asked her to put me in touch with her sister who worked for a women's rights organization. "I'm thinking about volunteering, maybe helping other immigrant women with employment issues," I told Jessica. Through this connection, I met Sarah Rodriguez, a lawyer who specialized in human trafficking cases. When I first approached her, I was careful not to reveal too much, just that I had concerns about exploitation in arranged marriages within my community. Sarah was brilliant. She immediately understood the sensitivity of the situation and helped me develop a plan that would protect both me and the other victims while gathering enough evidence to involve law enforcement.
"The key," she explained during one of our secret meetings, "is documentation. We need financial records, communications, evidence of coercion. But most importantly, we need testimony from multiple victims who are willing to speak. The hardest part was reaching out to the other women without arousing suspicion. I started slowly, with casual conversations at community events, offering support that seemed natural. Help with job applications, English tutoring, someone to talk to about adjustment difficulties. Carmen was the first to open up completely. When I carefully shared some of my own experiences, she broke down and told me everything. Her family had borrowed money for her father's medical treatment. When they couldn't repay, she became the collateral. Her husband not only controlled every aspect of her life, but had begun pressuring her to identify other young women in vulnerable situations. "The baby," she whispered, placing a protective hand over her growing belly. "I'm scared about what happens when the baby comes. He's already talking about how children make women more cooperative, how they ensure we won't try to leave." Through Carmen, I connected with 3 other women in similar situations. Each had a slightly different story, but the pattern was identical: family debt, arrangement through intermediaries, isolation from support systems, and gradual revelation of the true nature of their situation. But gathering evidence meant taking enormous risks. I had to photograph documents without being caught, record conversations without Carlos becoming suspicious, and coordinate with other women without triggering the network's security measures. The psychological toll was devastating. Every day I had to pretend to be the compliant wife while secretly working to expose the system that had trapped me. I watched other women suffer, knowing that premature action could make things worse for everyone. The guilt was overwhelming. 3 months into my evidence gathering, Carlos began to suspect something. I was too confident, too composed for someone who was supposed to be broken into submission. "You're different," he said one evening, studying my face across the dinner table. "More defiant. Have you been talking to someone?" "I'm just adjusting, like you wanted, learning to accept my situation." But he wasn't convinced. He started monitoring my phone, my computer, my movements more carefully. He began involving his male relatives in checking on me, which meant I was never truly alone. My window for gathering evidence began closing rapidly. The pressure affected my work performance. I made mistakes, missed deadlines, seemed distracted during meetings. My supervisor called me in for a performance review. "Esperanza, you've always been one of our strongest team members, but lately—" She paused, clearly uncomfortable. "Is everything okay at home? Are you having personal problems?" I wanted desperately to tell her everything, but I knew that premature disclosure could endanger all the other women I was trying to help. "Just some adjustment issues with married life. I'll do better." But things got worse when Carlos decided I was becoming too independent at work. He started showing up at my office unexpectedly, ostensibly to take his wife to lunch, but really to monitor my interactions with colleagues. He befriended my male coworkers, gradually poisoning them against me with subtle implications about my emotional instability and difficulty adjusting to marriage. Within weeks, I went from being a respected team member to someone my colleagues whispered about and avoided. My career, the one thing I had thought I could maintain, began crumbling. The isolation deepened when Carlos decided to move us to a house further from the city center, away from my workplace and any potential support networks. "More space," he explained to the community. "Better for starting a family." But I knew it was about control. During this period, I made a terrible mistake. Desperate to maintain contact with the other women, I tried to call Carmen from my work phone. But Carlos had already gotten to her husband, warning him about outside influences trying to corrupt their wives. Diego confronted Carmen violently that night. She ended up in the hospital with a miscarriage, officially caused by a fall down the stairs. When I saw her afterward, her spirit was completely broken. "I can't help you anymore," she whispered when I tried to visit her. "I can't risk it. Please, Don't contact me again." I realized then that my pursuit of justice was causing immediate harm to the very people I was trying to protect. The weight of that knowledge was crushing. Despite the setbacks, I couldn't abandon the other women still trapped in the system. Through Sarah Rodriguez, I learned that law enforcement was becoming interested in the network, but they needed more concrete evidence, particularly financial records and testimony from multiple victims. I made the decision to take a much bigger risk. During a family gathering at my uncle's house, the same uncle who had counted that initial payment, I managed to access his home office. I knew he kept records of all his business dealings, including the marriage arrangements. What I found there was worse than anything I had imagined. Ledgers detailing payments for dozens of women over the past 5 years, plans to expand operations to other cities. Most horrifying of all, a discussion about bringing in younger girls, some as young as 14, under the guise of educational exchanges that would actually be preliminary to forced marriages. I photographed everything I could, my hands shaking as I worked. But as I was finishing, I heard footsteps in the hallway. My uncle was coming back. I barely managed to replace the documents and exit through the back door, but I knew he would eventually realize someone had been in his office. My time was running out. 2 days later, Carlos confronted me with evidence that someone had been in Uncle Miguel's office during the gathering. Security cameras had captured a figure they couldn't identify clearly, but the timing coincided with my absence from the family gathering. "You know, it was you," he said, his voice deadly calm. "I know you've been scheming, planning something, but you need to understand, you can't win this fight. You're one person against an entire community network. Your family's financial survival depends on your cooperation. Other women's safety depends on your silence." He was right about the odds, but he was wrong about my resolve. That night, I made copies of all the evidence I had gathered and stored them in multiple locations. Then I wrote a detailed confession of everything I knew, including the locations of additional evidence and the names of other potential witnesses. If something happened to me, at least the truth would survive. But Carlos wasn't finished with his pressure campaign. The next week, I received a call from my mother. "Esperanza, we need to talk. In person. Come home for dinner on Friday." I knew it was a trap, but I also knew that avoiding it would only confirm their suspicions. I went to my childhood home, the place where I had felt safe and loved for the first 22 years of my life. My parents, uncle, and several community elders were waiting for me. The atmosphere was heavy with disappointment and accusation.
"Mija," my father began, using the term of endearment that now felt like mockery. "We hear you've been having difficulties accepting your responsibilities as a wife." Sitting in my parents' living room, surrounded by the people who had once represented love and security, I felt the full weight of my isolation. These weren't strangers who had betrayed me. These were the people who had sung me lullabies, celebrated my achievements, promised to always protect me. "You sold me," I said quietly, looking directly at my father. "You took money and handed me over to a man who treats me like property." My mother's face crumpled. "We did what we had to do to save this family. You don't understand the pressure we were under, the debts." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted. "You were in debt, so you turned me into collateral. But what I don't understand is how you sleep at night knowing what you've done." My Uncle Miguel leaned forward, his expression hardening. "What we've done is ensured this family's survival. What you're doing is putting everyone at risk with your selfishness." Selfishness? The word felt like a physical blow. I'm being controlled, isolated, my entire life monitored and managed, and you call resistance selfishness? You have a roof over your head, food on your table, a husband who provides for you. One of the community elders interjected. Many women would be grateful for such security. I looked around the room at these men who had watched me grow up, who had praised my academic achievements, who had seemed proud of my potential. Now they were justifying my reduction to a commodity. Is this what you want for your own daughters? For your granddaughters? To be sold when the family needs money? The room fell silent. Finally, my father spoke, his voice heavy with something that might have been regret. Esperanza, we love you. Everything we did was out of love. But love sometimes requires sacrifice. Your sacrifice ensures your brother can complete college, ensures your younger cousins have dowries for proper marriages, ensures this family doesn't lose everything we've worked for. And what about my love? What about my dreams, my future, my right to choose my own path? My mother began crying then, deep sobs that shook her entire body. You think this was easy for us? You think we wanted this? We prayed, we looked for other solutions, but there was no other way. There's always another way, I said. You just chose the one that sacrificed me instead of your pride. The conversation continued for hours, going in circles. They wanted me to understand their position, to forgive them, to accept the situation and make the best of it. I wanted them to acknowledge what they had done, to help me find a way out, to choose their daughter over their debts. Neither side could give the other what they needed. Finally, my uncle stood up. Enough. Esperanza, you have a choice to make. You can continue this path of rebellion, which will destroy not just yourself, but everyone in this family. Or you can accept your responsibilities and help us make this situation work for everyone. And if I choose rebellion? His face was stone. Then you are no longer our family member. You become a stranger who happens to share our blood. And strangers can't expect family protection or support. The threat was clear. If I continued my resistance, I would be completely cut off. No family, no community, no cultural identity. I would become a ghost in my own life. As I left my parents' house that night, I realized I was walking away from more than a building. I was walking away from everything that had defined me for 22 years. My language, my culture, my history, my identity, all of it was tied to people who had decided I was expendable. The weeks following the family confrontation were the darkest of my life. I felt completely untethered, floating in a space between worlds with no solid ground beneath my feet. The weight of what I was about to lose and what I had already lost threatened to crush my resolve. Carlos sensed the shift in my family dynamics and increased his psychological pressure. See, he would say during his daily interrogations about my activities, even your own family understands that fighting this system is pointless. Why can't you be smart like them? But it was during this period of despair that I received an unexpected message through Sarah Rodriguez. Another woman, someone I had never met, had reached out through the legal aid network. Her name was Elena, and she had escaped a similar situation 2 years earlier. I heard through certain channels that someone is trying to expose the marriage broker network. I want to help. I have information you need, and I know others who might be willing to testify. Meeting Elena changed everything. She was proof that escape was possible, that survival was possible, that building a new life was possible. But she was also evidence of the cost. I lost everything, she told me during our first meeting at a safe location Sarah had arranged. My family disowned me completely. I can never go back to El Salvador to see my grandparents before they die. I had to change my name, move to a different city, start completely over. Some days I wonder if it was worth it. But you're free, I said. She nodded slowly. Yes, I'm free, but freedom is cold when you're alone in it. Elena helped me understand the full scope of the network I was trying to expose. It extended beyond Houston, with connections in Los Angeles, Phoenix, and even cities like Atlanta. The financial flows were enormous, millions of dollars changing hands annually, with dozens of families benefiting from the system while hundreds of women suffered within it. The thing you have to understand, Alana explained, is that many people in the community genuinely believe they're doing the right thing. They see it as preserving tradition, ensuring security for women, maintaining family honor. The ones who know it's exploitation are a smaller group, but they're the ones with the power. With Alana's help, I connected with 3 other escaped women and 2 who were still trapped but willing to testify secretly. We also identified a financial investigator who specialized in tracking money laundering operations disguised as legitimate businesses. But as our case grew stronger, the risks increased exponentially. The network began to suspect that someone was organizing resistance. Security tightened around all the current victims. Several families suddenly announced they were sending their daughters back home for extended visits, which we knew was code for removing potential witnesses from the country. I realized that if we were going to act, it had to be soon. But I also realized that once we acted, there would be no going back, not just for me, but for everyone involved.
The confrontation I had been avoiding finally came when Carlos discovered I had been secretly meeting with other women. He found a message on my phone from Sarah Rodriguez, and although it was carefully coded, he was smart enough to decipher its meaning. "You've been building a case against us," he said that evening, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Against your own husband, your own family, your own community?" I didn't deny it. The time for pretense was over. "Yes," I said. "I have." For the first time since our wedding night, I saw genuine emotion in his eyes. Not anger, but something more complex. Fear, maybe? Or disappointment. "Do you have any idea what you're destroying?" he asked. "This system supports dozens of families. It provides security for women who would otherwise have no options. It preserves our culture in a hostile foreign environment." "It enslaves women," I replied. "It turns daughters into commodities and marriages into business transactions." "And what's your alternative?" His voice rose. "Complete assimilation? Abandoning all our traditions? Letting our community dissolve into the American mainstream until we lose everything that makes us who we are?" For the first time, I heard the fear beneath his control. The fear of cultural extinction, of losing identity in a foreign land, of watching everything his ancestors had built disappear into the melting pot of American society. There has to be a middle path, traditions that don't require sacrificing women's freedom, community that doesn't depend on exploitation. He shook his head. "You're naive. You think there are perfect solutions, but there aren't. There are only trade-offs. We chose to preserve our culture and support our families. You're choosing individual freedom over collective survival." "I'm choosing dignity over survival," I corrected. That's when he told me about the consequences my resistance would trigger. Not just for me, but for everyone involved in the system. "If this network is exposed," he said, "dozens of families will face financial ruin. Men will go to prison. Women will be left without support systems. Children will lose their fathers. The entire community will be destroyed, scattered, broken." I felt the weight of that responsibility crushing down on me. How many lives would be damaged by my pursuit of justice? How many innocent people would suffer because I couldn't accept my situation? But then I thought about Carmen's miscarriage, about the list of teenage girls being targeted for future exploitation, about the women who would be trafficked into the system if it continued to operate. "Maybe," I said, "some systems deserve to be destroyed." That night, Carlos made his final offer. If I abandoned my legal case and destroyed all the evidence I had gathered, he would allow me to work, to maintain some independence, to have a marriage that resembled a partnership rather than ownership. "We can make this work," he said. "Esperanza, I'm not a monster.
I'm just a man trying to navigate impossible circumstances. Help me find a way that doesn't destroy everything." For a moment, I was tempted. The offer represented a kind of freedom, even if it wasn't complete freedom. It would spare my family, preserve the community, prevent the suffering that exposure would cause to innocent people. "But I can't," I said finally. "I can't save myself and leave the others behind." The next morning, I didn't go to work. Instead, I went to Sarah Rodriguez's office with copies of all the evidence I have gathered, along with testimony from the other women who were willing to speak. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah asked as we prepared to contact law enforcement. "Once we file these reports, there's no going back. Your life as you know it will be over." I thought about my parents, about the community that had raised me, about the culture and traditions that had shaped my identity. I thought about my little brother, about my cousins, about the family honor that would be destroyed by my actions. Then I thought about Carmen's miscarriage, about Elena's lonely freedom, about the teenage girls on that list, and about all the women who would suffer if this system continued. "I'm sure," I said. The legal process moved quickly once it began. Financial investigators traced the money flows, revealing a network that extended far beyond what even I had suspected. Immigration officials identified women who had entered the country under false pretenses. Social services began reaching out to potential victims. Within a week, arrests began. My uncle Miguel was charged with human trafficking and money laundering. Carlos and several other men were charged with various forms of exploitation and conspiracy. My father was questioned as a witness, though not charged criminally. The community's reaction was swift and brutal. I was declared dead to my family in all but the literal sense. My name was not to be spoken, my existence not acknowledged. Friends I had known since childhood crossed the street to avoid me. But the most painful moment came when my mother called me one final time. "Are you happy now?" she asked, her voice broken. "Your father's business is ruined. Your brother had to drop out of college. Your uncle's children are being bullied at school. The whole community treats us like criminals. Was this worth it?" "Mama," I said, crying as I spoke, "I did this because I love you, because I want better for our community, for the next generation of daughters." "Love?" Her laugh was bitter. "This isn't love, Esperanza. This is selfishness. This is you choosing your own pride over your family's survival." The line went dead. It was the last time I ever spoke to my mother. 6 months later, I was living in Denver under a new name, working for a nonprofit organization that helped immigrant women escape exploitation. The legal case had largely been successful. The trafficking network was dismantled, several men were imprisoned, and new protections were put in place for vulnerable women. But the personal cost was exactly what everyone had warned me it would be. I had no family, no cultural community, no connection to the traditions and language that had shaped the first 22 years of my life. I couldn't attend weddings or funerals, couldn't celebrate holidays in the traditional way, couldn't pass on cultural knowledge to the children I might someday have. Some nights, the loneliness was overwhelming. I would dream about my mother's cooking, about my father's terrible jokes, about the feeling of belonging somewhere completely. I would wake up crying, wondering if Carlos had been right, if individual freedom was worth the collective destruction I had caused. But then, I would receive messages from women who had been helped by our legal action. Carmen had divorced Diego and was now studying to become a nurse. 2 of the teenage girls on that targeting list had been protected before they could be trapped. Several families had been reunited with daughters who had been isolated from them by the system. Elena became one of my closest friends, someone who understood the specific grief of choosing freedom over belonging. Together, we built a new kind of family among the women who had escaped similar situations. "The thing about revenge," Elena told me one evening as we watched the sunset over the Rocky Mountains, "is that people think it's about hurting the people who hurt you. But real revenge, lasting revenge, is building something better than what they tried to trap you in. She was right. My revenge wasn't the arrests or the legal consequences. My revenge was every woman who escaped because of the network we exposed, every teenage girl who was protected before they could be trapped. Several families had been reunited with daughters who had been isolated from them by the system. 2 years after the legal case concluded, I received an unexpected visitor at my office. My younger brother, Louis, had found me despite my new identity and location. He looked older than his 20 years, worn down by the consequences of my actions on our family. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the sister who had chosen justice over loyalty, and the brother who had paid the price for her choice. He said finally, "I graduate next month. I managed to get financial aid, work-study programs. It took longer, but I'm finishing my degree." I felt a surge of pride mixed with overwhelming guilt. "Louis, I'm so sorry about—" "Don't," he interrupted. "I didn't come here for apologies. I came because I need to tell you something." He sat down across from my desk, his hands shaking slightly. After everything happened, after the arrests and the community backlash, I started paying attention to things I had ignored before. I noticed how our male cousins talked about their wives. I saw how our female cousins changed after marriage, became quieter, more fearful, more controlled. I remained silent, letting him speak. "I met a girl at college. Her name is Jennifer. Not a Latina name. Not from our community. When I started thinking about marrying her, I realized I had a choice. I could bring her into our system, let our family arrange things, treat her the way Carlos treated you, or I could break the cycle." He paused, gathering courage for what came next. "I'm marrying her next month. A civil ceremony, just the two of us and some friends. Our parents don't know about her, don't approve of my choice. They think I'm destroying our family honor even more than you did." I felt tears starting to fall. "Louis," he said simply, "you were right. The system was wrong. I couldn't see it while I was benefiting from it. But once I had to face the possibility of being part of it myself, I understood what you were fighting against." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph, a picture of him with a young woman, both of them smiling genuinely, freely. "He wanted you to know that your sacrifice wasn't for nothing. At least one person in our family learned from what you went through." We talked for hours that day. He told me about the changes in our community, how some families had begun questioning the old arrangements, how some young men were refusing to participate in the marriage broker system, how some women were demanding more say in their own futures. The network I had exposed was gone, but the cultural shift I had hoped for was happening, slowly, family by family, generation by generation. When he left, Louis hugged me, the first physical affection I had received from a family member in over 2 years. He said, "I can't give you back everything you lost, but I can promise you that some good came from your choice. And maybe someday, when enough has changed, there might be a way back home for you." 5 years have passed since I escaped that marriage, since I chose to expose the system that had trapped me and so many others. I'm 32 now, living a life I never could have imagined when I was 22 and dreaming of fairy tale romance. I run a nonprofit organization that helps immigrant women escape exploitation. I've testified before Congress about human trafficking in ethnic communities. I've helped draft legislation to protect vulnerable women from forced marriage. My work has meaning, purpose, impact. But I still dream about my mother's tamales. I still feel a pang of loss every time I see families celebrating together during religious holidays. I still wonder what my life would have been like if I had chosen compliance over resistance. The women I work with often ask me if it was worth it, if the freedom I gained was worth everything I lost. It's not a simple question with a simple answer. I lost my family, my community, my cultural identity, my sense of belonging. I can never go home again. Not really. Even if individual relationships healed, the community that shaped me no longer exists in the same form.
I sacrificed my past to protect other women's futures. But I gained something too. I gained the knowledge that I could survive the worst betrayal imaginable and still build a meaningful life. I gained the ability to help other women escape similar traps. I gained the satisfaction of knowing that young girls today have more choices because of the price I paid. Most importantly, I gained myself, not the version of myself that my family wanted me to be, not the version that would have fit comfortably into their plans, but the version that could look in the mirror and respect what she saw. The revenge story people want to hear has a clear villain and a satisfying ending where justice prevails and the hero emerges triumphant. But real life is messier than that. The people who betrayed me weren't monsters. They were people I loved who made terrible choices under impossible pressure. The justice I achieved came at a cost that still keeps me awake some nights. But here's what I've learned about revenge. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't hurting the people who hurt you. Sometimes it's refusing to let their choices define your life. Sometimes it's building something better from the wreckage they left behind. I chose freedom over belonging, justice over loyalty, truth over peace. Some days I question that choice, but most days I know it was the only choice I could make and still live with myself. And maybe that's the real revenge, living well despite everything they tried to take from me, helping other women find their own paths to freedom, refusing to let their betrayal turn me into someone I couldn't respect. My name is Hope, not the name I was born with, but the name I chose for my new life. And this is my story of escape, justice, and the complicated price of choosing freedom over family. The system that trapped me is gone. The women who were suffering in silence now have voices. The girls who would have been targeted next are safe. That's worth everything it cost me. That's worth everything.
If this story resonated with you, please like this video and share it with others who might need to hear it. Your engagement helps stories like mine reach women who might be trapped in similar situations right now. In the comments, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what you knew was right? What's the most difficult sacrifice you've ever made for your principles? And remember, if you or someone you know is trapped in a situation involving forced marriage, human trafficking, or domestic exploitation, there are resources available. Links to help organizations are in the description below. Subscribe for more stories of survival, resistance, and the complicated journey toward freedom. Sometimes the people we trust most are the ones we need protection from. But that doesn't mean we're powerless to change our circumstances. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for caring about women's freedom. And thank you for believing that everyone deserves the right to choose their own path in life. Until next time, remember, your freedom is worth fighting for, even when the cost seems impossibly high.